Good afternoon. My name is Ms Ferran, and I'm a science teacher at Harris Garrard Academy. I'd first of all like to thank you for inviting us to participate in the Bexley Eco Festival. And what we'd like to do today is share some work we've been doing at Harris Garrard to help our students understand their connections to nature through the local habitats and ecosystems in Thamesmead. We are fortunate to have examples of these habitats in our grounds. When we started talking about this, the first questions that usually popped up were, where's the pond and what woodland? So to give you some perspective, we're here at the Environmental Atlas for the Greater Thames Marshes Nature Improvement Area. This is a web map available online, and you can see that there is a border all the way around the Nature Improvement Area, and within that border, these are the priority habitats. So you can see examples of mudflats, salt marsh, and floodplain grazing marsh, which is part of the Erith marshes, and all of these provide important ecological functions in the Greater Thames marshes, including soft defenses for dissipating wave energy and habitats and food sources for different species. Wetland pond ecosystems are an example of the type of habitat that you'll find here. Wetlands are areas where still water covers the soil and the ground is very wet. They can be found in and along the boundaries of rivers, lakes, or ponds, so here along the edge of the River Thames. Wetland ecosystems are essential to the food chain, and we have an example of a food chain here with the leaves and algae, our primary producers at the bottom of the food chain, the insects and organisms that are going to feed on the detritus, as well as the fish that are going to eat the smaller organisms, and then of course the kingfisher at the top of the food chain that's going to eat the fish. These ecosystems provide habitats for breeding and feeding locations for the wildlife, and we have an example of all the different organisms together in the ecosystem. Wetland ecosystems are important in regulating climate and flood patterns and for supporting a healthy ecology in other areas that interconnect with them. So all the different ecosystems that interconnect to support healthy ecology for all the plants and animals. Harris Garrard does have a pond on our grounds. It's right here between primary and secondary. We also have a woodland at the far end of the sports field. This is an overview of our garden area with our little wetland pond ecosystem. And this is what we would like our pond to look like. So ideally, we would have all the different types of plants and animals that live in the freshwater ecosystem. In real life, this is what our pond looks like because we have a safety cover over the top, but we've still been able to carry out some pond dipping, and it still supports a healthy ecosystem. The pond is a wetland, and it is connected to the freshwater Erith marshes behind the school, and it provides habitat to plants and wildlife, supporting a healthy ecology. Let's have a look at a video of the type of activities that we carried out with our students.
Hi, my name is Ms Ferran. I'm a science teacher at Harris Garrard. Today we're going to show you some of the activities that we've started doing with our kids in addition to our science curriculum. So we're here at our wetland pond ecosystem, which is directly connected to the Erith marshes through the hydrology, through the underground water. And we are on the edge of the River Thames here. So our Erith marshes go right out to the salt marshes and right out to the River Thames. What we'd like to do today is look at some of the organisms that live in our pond that support the ecosystem as well as our bigger food chain, and how this area is part of the bigger ecosystem. So right now I'm going to use my pond dipper. This isn't actually what you would use for a pond dipper on a regular basis, but because we have this safety covering on top of our pond, we have to be very inventive about how we do it. So we're going to use our pond dipper. Obviously this is not something to try without supervision. And we're going to try to scoop up some of the organisms that are living here in our pond. And then we're going to pour it into our observing chamber and see if we can find anything living in here. So if we wanted to look at this under a microscope, we might have a better chance of seeing some of what might be living. I was hoping to get some insects. Let's see if we can try again. Okay.
So because we weren't able to get insects or larger organisms due to the safety covering on our pond, we've also taken our students out to pond dip at Tump 53 Nature Reserve in Timsmead. You can see the students leaning down with their big pond dipping nets and collecting organisms. And they did get quite a few larger organisms that live in the pond. You can see different little crustaceans and swimming insects and worms that were collected at our recent visit. During our owned pond dip at Terrace Garrard, we were able to collect phytoplankton and diatoms. These are the primary producers at the bottom of the food chain that help support the larger food chain, and we were able to take them back to the lab and view them under the microscope. We also want to talk about the function of the wetlands as a natural water filter. So let's watch our video on how we can model a natural water filter.
Functions of our wetland pond ecosystem is to help filter our water and to make it drinkable. So when it rains or when there's runoff from the rain, all of that water will come through our wetlands and it will clean the water for us before it gets to our aquifer where our fresh water is stored and before it gets to the Thames where we get some of our drinking water as well. So what I've done, with the help of my amazing lab technicians, is build a model of a filtration system. And I think you can see here we have the grass and the soil. We've got some bigger rocks that go down into smaller rocks. And then this would be like the detritus that builds up on the bottom of the pond. So I'm going to take my very, very dirty water that I have shaken up, and I'm going to pour it through my natural water filter. And by the time that water gets through, you will be able to see that it is much clearer than when we started. Let me hold it. So you can see that black water is now turned into a nice clear color. And of course it would continue to go through water filtration systems before we drank it. But it's already much cleaner than it was when it went into the filter. And that's because we have a natural water filtration system in our wetland pond ecosystems. Good? Now we can see what would happen if we poured it back into our water filter and see how much cleaner the water is going to be this time around. And already it's a drastic difference. Much cleaner water. We're getting closer to water that we can drink. Great. So now we know the value of our wetland ecosystems. Thank you. Function.
Some of the other work that we've been doing is to look at how many different plants are living in our grasslands, in our meadows, and in our woodlands. So a scientific technique that we use is called a quadrat. This is a sampling technique that will help us count how many wildflowers there are living in our area. Quadrats would be placed randomly throughout your area so that you get a representative sample. And you do it over and over again, so you take many different samples so that you get an idea of what kind of plants are living in your ecosystem. So we were able to demonstrate this as well. This is some of the work that we've done with the kids. If you want to study the different kinds of vegetation that's growing around either your woodland forest or your wetland pond ecosystem, this is called a quadrat. It's broken up into equally spaced squares, and it's 10 squares by 10 squares. So we would take this, and depending on the kind of sample that you wanted to take, we would throw it out into the grass and count everything that falls underneath that quadrat. Now, this works because now we can say, I have, within each one of these squares, if we want to pick one plant to count, I kind of like the yellow flowers. So I'm going to count how many of this particular type of plant
is growing. Okay, so we find that I've got the yellow plant in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, those are all in 1, 12, and 13 out of 100. So I've got 13 out of 100 of my squares that are filled with this lovely yellow plant. And we would then estimate how many of these flowers are in the entire garden area. So by knowing how big the garden area is, by the half-meter squared quadrat, we can then calculate how many of these yellow plants are estimated to be growing throughout our garden area. So I will do the math for you in just a minute. If you want.
So we know from that particular quadrat sample that the quadrat we used was 0.5 meters by 0.5 meters on each side, which leads to a 0.25 meter squared quadrat, a quarter of a meter squared. And our whole garden area is 2,150 meters squared. So we have to know how many of those quadrats could fit in the garden. So you take the total number of area, the total amount of area in your garden, and you divide it by the size of your quadrat, and that gives you the number of times it could fit inside your garden area if you wanted to count every bit. Normally, you would throw your quadrat several times, and you would get an average of the number of plants that you found in each one of those quadrats. So you get the average by taking the sum of the number of plants that you found in each trial. A trial is each time that you throw the quadrat and count the plants. So you take the sum of the number of all the plants you found in each one of those trials, and then you divide it by the total number of trials or the total number of times that you threw the quadrat. Once you've done that, you get an average. Now, we only did it once, so we're going to assume that if we'd done it many, many different times, we would have gotten an average of 13 flowers. The 13 yellow flowers, they are called bristly ox tongues, but we would have gotten 13 as our average times 8,600, which is the 8,600 quadrats worth of space in the garden, to get an estimate of 111,800 yellow flowers in the whole garden area. So this is just an example of how we can analyze our garden space or our wetland meadow or any of our woodlands to see how many different plants are living in the area. We also wanted to look at the nature conservation and management schemes in our area to talk about the different habitats that are connected. So you can see that we have a local nature reserve right here, the Crossness Nature Reserve, and we're also very close to Abbey Woods. The English Habitat Network has identified all these different habitats in the area, of which two we are connected. So we have mires and fens and bogs, we have grasslands, we have woodlands. So all of these things are right here in the center of Thamesmead. Here we have examples of the different habitats. So this is an image of the Crossness Nature Reserve, and this is an image of Abbey Wood. And woodland ecosystems are another important habitat that we find right here in Thamesmead. A woodland is a habitat where trees are the dominant plant form. Urban trees and woodlands are very valuable because of their location. So trees, woodlands that grow in urban areas with lots of dense populations where lots of people live are very important. They support plants and animals. They also clean our air and boost our well-being. Urban woods and trees support a huge range of wildlife. So you can see all of these different trees in our picture here that are common in this area support all of these different types of animals and birds. They're somewhere to feed and shelter and breed, and they're vitally important for our connectivity and supporting species in urban areas. So they connect all the different habitats and ecosystems for the wildlife and plants. Urban trees and woodlands are often made up of very hardy species that are resistant to pollution, which is very important when you live in an urban area. This is what our woodland looks like. You can see that we've carved out a little piece of the woodland for use as the forest school for the primary. Our woodland is part of the English Habitat Network. It has been identified as one of 4 key habitats that promote ecological connectivity. Again, that concept is very important, that we have connected habitats that provide places for all of our wildlife and our plants to live. So they connect all the fragments of habitat, and our woodland provides habitat to plants and wildlife and supports important ecological functions. I'd like to finish by saying that how important both our woodland and our wetland ecosystems are. The Royal Horticultural Society's chief horticulturist has said that trees are the single most important way for gardeners to improve the environment and help wildlife. And this is rivaled only by ponds. So woodlands and ponds are 2 of the most important ways that we can help improve the environment and help wildlife. So hopefully I've given you a brief overview of some of the things that we're doing at Harris-Garrard to help our students understand their connections to the habitats and ecosystems in Thamesmead, and that Thamesmead has a large amount of great green space, woodlands, and wetlands that are very important to climate, very important to flood defenses, and very important to our wildlife by providing healthy habitats that all support our greater ecosystems that are important to our own health and well-being. Again, thank you for inviting us to participate, and I hope this gave you a good idea of what we're trying to do at Harris-Garrard.